I'm May, 61 years old and widowed for 10 years now since John passed away. The house we bought together has been my only comfort, filled with 30 years of memories. My son Thomas moved back 5 years ago after his divorce, and initially it was wonderful having him home again. But lately, something has changed between us. The tension builds daily, and yesterday it finally erupted when Thomas looked me straight in the eyes and said those words I never thought I'd hear. "It's time you moved out." If you're watching this, drop a comment, letting me know where you're from. Hit subscribe and stick around to see how I responded when my own son tried to evict me from my home. John and I met when we were both 25, young and ambitious, but completely broke. He was a carpenter with talented hands that could transform raw wood into beautiful furniture, and I was a kindergarten teacher who adored working with children. We fell in love quickly, married within a year, and spent the next 3 decades building a life together brick by brick. Our first home was a tiny apartment above a noisy restaurant with pipes that clanged all night and windows that leaked cold air during winter. But it was ours, and we were determined to save enough for something better. John worked extra jobs on weekends while I tutored after school hours. Every dollar went into our house fund jar that sat proudly on our kitchen counter. It took us 6 years of saving, but when we finally had enough for a down payment, we found the perfect house on Maple Street. It wasn't fancy, a simple 3-bedroom ranch with a yard that needed work, but the moment we walked in, John squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is home, May." We signed the papers that afternoon. The house became the backdrop for all our major life moments. We brought Thomas home as a newborn to the blue nursery John had painted himself. We celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and promotions in the kitchen with its worn countertops. John built a treehouse in the backyard oak tree when Thomas was 7. Every corner held a story. Every wall had witnessed our laughter and tears. John's illness came without warning. What started as persistent back pain led to a diagnosis that shattered our world: terminal pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, but my stubborn husband fought for 14, refusing to leave until Thomas had graduated college. The night John died, he made me promise to keep the house. "This place will take care of you, May," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's your security. Never let it go." I held his hand until his breathing stopped, and then I was alone at 51, a widow in a house suddenly too quiet. The grief nearly broke me. For months, I barely left my bedroom, surrounded by John's things that I couldn't bear to move. His coffee mug remained on the nightstand. His slippers stayed by the bed. His jacket hung on the hook by the door. I expected him to walk through that door every evening, and each day the disappointment crushed me anew. My sister Jennifer came to stay for a while, gently encouraging me to eat, to shower, to step outside. The financial situation wasn't dire, thankfully. John had been prudent with life insurance, and the house was fully paid off, a gift of security he'd insisted on providing. But money couldn't fill the emptiness or silence the echoes in rooms once filled with his laughter. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, I began to heal. I joined a grief support group at the community center. I reconnected with former colleagues from the school where I'd taught. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted but never had time for. Each small step forward felt like both a victory and a betrayal of John's memory, but I kept going. By the time 3 years had passed, I had established a new routine. Mondays and Wednesdays, volunteering at the library. Thursdays, lunch with my friend Laura. Weekends, tending to my garden or visiting my sister. The house began to feel less like a museum of what I'd lost and more like a sanctuary I could shape for my new life. Thomas, meanwhile, had built a life of his own. After college, he'd moved to the city, landed a job as a junior sales representative at a software company, and met Stephanie, a vivacious marketing executive. I adored Stephanie from our first meeting. She was smart, ambitious, and most importantly, she made my son happy. When they announced their engagement after 2 years of dating, I wept with joy at the rehearsal dinner. Their wedding was beautiful, a springtime celebration in a converted barn with twinkling lights and wildflower centerpieces. As mother of the groom, I gave a speech about watching Thomas grow from a curious little boy into a man ready to build his own family. John would have been so proud. The newlyweds bought a small condo downtown close to both their offices. Thomas received promotion after promotion, eventually becoming a regional sales manager. Their social media showed weekend trips, fancy restaurants, and a lifestyle that looked picture perfect. I visited occasionally, always bringing homemade cookies that Stephanie claimed to love, but I noticed often remained untouched. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Thomas, his voice cracking, told me Stephanie had left him. She'd been having an affair with her boss for months, and they were moving to Chicago together. My son, always so confident and put together, broke down sobbing over the phone, and my heart shattered for him. The divorce was ugly and expensive. Thomas had to buy out Stephanie's portion of the condo at a time when the market was peaking. Legal fees drained his savings. Then came the company restructuring that eliminated his position, leaving him with a modest severance package and a bruised ego. When Thomas asked if he could move back home temporarily, just until he found another job and got back on his feet, I didn't hesitate. Of course, my son could come home. Isn't that what family is for? The guest room was already made up with fresh linens, and I stocked the refrigerator with all his childhood favorites. The day Thomas moved back in, carrying 2 suitcases and a box of personal items, I felt a rush of maternal purpose I hadn't experienced in years. My son needed me again. We stayed up late that first night, sharing a bottle of wine at the kitchen table while he poured out his heartbreak and fears for the future. I promised him everything would be okay, that he could stay as long as he needed. This arrangement would help us both, I thought. He would have a safe place to rebuild his life, and I would have company in my too-quiet house. For the first few months, it seemed like the perfect solution. Thomas took over mowing the lawn and handling household repairs that had been neglected since John died. I cooked his favorite meals and enjoyed having someone to care for again. We established a loose agreement that he would contribute to utilities and groceries once he found stable employment, but I wasn't worried about the money. Having my son home felt like a blessing. Little did I know that what started as a temporary arrangement would stretch into years, and that the son who once brought joy back into my home would eventually tell me I no longer belonged there. The first signs that our living arrangement might not be as harmonious as I imagined appeared about 6 months after Thomas moved in. He had found a new job, not quite at the same level as his previous position, but with decent pay and good prospects for advancement. I expected he would start contributing to household expenses as we'd discussed, but when I gently brought it up over dinner, he seemed surprised. "Mom, I'm still getting back on my feet here," he said, setting down his fork with a clatter that made me flinch. "The divorce wiped me out, and I'm just starting to build my savings again. Can we revisit this in another month or 2? Of course I agreed. What mother wouldn't want to help her child? I told myself it was temporary, just a little longer until he was truly stable. But 1 month turned into 3, and still no contribution came. Other small tensions began to surface. The dishes Thomas promised to wash would sit in the sink for days. Groceries I bought for the week would disappear in 2 days with no offer to replace them. His laundry piled up in the bathroom we shared, and wet towels remained on the floor despite the hook installed right beside the shower. When I tried to address these issues, Thomas would sigh dramatically or give a quick, "Sorry, Mom," before changing the subject. Sometimes he'd make a joke about how I'd always been a neat freak, making me question whether I was being unreasonable. I found myself making excuses for him in my own mind. The divorce had been traumatic. Starting over in your 30s was hard. He just needed more time to heal. But time didn't seem to be healing anything. Instead, a subtle power shift began occurring in the house that had been mine alone for years. Thomas started rearranging the living room furniture without asking, claiming the new layout made more sense. He complained about the temperature. I kept the thermostat at, then simply changed it when I wasn't looking. The television, once tuned to my evening cooking shows or mystery programs, now blared sports or action movies at volumes that made conversation impossible. Gradually, I found myself retreating to my bedroom earlier and earlier each evening. It became my sanctuary, the one place in the house where Thomas's growing presence hadn't encroached. I installed a small television and a comfortable reading chair, creating a space that was just for me. But even there I could hear Thomas and his friends laughing and talking late into the night, apparently unconcerned that I might be trying to sleep. Those friends were another source of tension. They would appear without warning, raiding my refrigerator and leaving beer cans on my carefully tended garden patio. Once I came home from grocery shopping to find 3 men I'd never met before, sprawled across my living room watching a football game. Thomas hadn't even bothered to introduce me. Mom, you're being weird, he said later when I mentioned feeling uncomfortable with strangers in my home. They're just my buddies. You should be happy I have a social life again after everything Stephanie put me through. That became a common refrain whenever I expressed any concerns after everything Stephanie put me through. It was emotional leverage that made me back down every time feeling guilty for adding to my son's burdens. But as months stretched into a second year, I began to wonder when that excuse would expire. The criticism started subtly, too. A wrinkled nose at dinner. "This chicken is really dry, Mom." A sigh when looking in the refrigerator. "Don't you ever buy anything besides old lady food?" Comments about the decor. "This place looks like a time capsule from the 90s. Each remark stung, but I smiled and tried to accommodate. Maybe the house could use some updating. Maybe my cooking had gotten bland over the years of cooking just for myself. Financial strain became increasingly difficult to ignore. With Thomas not contributing, but certainly consuming more than his fair share, my carefully planned retirement budget began to stretch thin. The electric bill doubled, the water bill tripled, grocery expenses skyrocketed. I started dipping into my savings, something John had always cautioned against. "The savings are for emergencies and your future security, May," he used to say, "not for day-to-day expenses." But what was I supposed to do? Throw my only child out on the street when Thomas did find stable employment again? I hoped the financial situation would improve. His salary, from what he casually mentioned, should have been more than adequate to contribute to our household. But when I brought up the subject of rent or splitting utilities, he acted shocked. "I thought you wanted me here, Mom," he said with a hurt expression that made me feel instantly guilty. "The house is paid off anyway, so it's not like you have a mortgage. And aren't you getting John's Social Security?" The conversation ended there with me apologizing for bringing it up and Thomas magnanimously forgiving me. Meanwhile, I noticed he had no trouble buying himself a new gaming system or expensive sneakers. Twice, he went on weekend trips with friends that must have cost considerably more than the token grocery run he would make once a month, proudly presenting it as his contribution to the household. My friends began visiting less frequently. Laura, my closest friend since college, was the first to say something. "May, I don't like how Thomas speaks to you," she said during one of our lunch dates. "And frankly, I feel uncomfortable in your house now. It's like he's the owner and you're the unwelcome guest." I defended him, of course. "He's still going through a tough time," I said, though even to my ears the excuse sounded hollow after nearly 2 years. Laura gave me a look that was both sad and knowing. At some point, May, you have to ask yourself, when does a tough time become just the way someone chooses to live? And at whose expense? Her words stayed with me, keeping me awake at night as I listened to Thomas moving around the house that increasingly felt less like my own. I found myself tiptoeing around in the mornings, careful not to wake him before noon on weekends. I stopped inviting my book club over because Thomas had made it clear he found a bunch of old ladies discussing boring books to be an inconvenience to his television watching. For the first time, I began to consider whether I should ask Thomas to find his own place, but the thought filled me with such anxiety that I would immediately push it away. What if he wasn't really ready? What if asking him to leave damaged our relationship permanently? What kind of mother puts her own comfort above her child's welfare? So I said nothing, and the situation continued to deteriorate with me, growing increasingly uncomfortable in my own home, and Thomas becoming more entitled with each passing day. 3 years into our cohabitation, communication between Thomas and me had broken down almost completely. My attempts to discuss household responsibilities were met with eye-rolling or outright dismissal. The house meetings I tried to schedule were convenient for Thomas to forget about or have sudden work emergencies that prevented his attendance. "Mom, can we not do this right now?" became his standard response to any conversation that might involve accountability or boundaries. When I would later reference agreements we'd supposedly made during our brief interactions, Thomas would look at me with confusion or concern. "I never said that, Mom. Are you sure you're remembering correctly?" This happened so frequently that I began to doubt my own recollections, wondering if age was affecting my memory more than I realized. The situation came to a head around Thomas's 35th birthday. Without consulting me, he invited 20 people over for a Saturday night party. I learned about it only 2 days before when I overheard him on the phone giving someone directions to my place. "Thomas, I would have appreciated some notice about a party this size," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I'll need to prepare the house and maybe make some food. He looked at me as if I'd suggested something ridiculous. Don't worry about it, Mom. It's just some friends coming over for drinks and music. We don't need your little sandwich platters or whatever you're thinking. Actually, it might be better if you make plans to be out that night. Janet has a spare room, right? Janet was my sister who lived an hour away. The suggestion that I should leave my own home for his convenience left me speechless. Before I could formulate a response, Thomas had patted my shoulder condescendingly and walked away, matter closed as far as he was concerned. I didn't leave for the party. Instead, I retreated to my bedroom early, hoping to read through the noise I knew would come. But reading proved impossible as bass-heavy music vibrated through the walls, accompanied by shouts and laughter that continued well past midnight. Several times, drunk strangers opened my bedroom door by mistake, looking for the bathroom or a private place for activities I preferred not to consider under my roof. The next morning revealed disaster throughout the house. Stained carpets, broken glassware, cigarette burns on the wooden coffee table John had crafted by hand. Someone had vomited in the hallway bathroom and made only a cursory attempt to clean it up. The garden I'd tended so carefully had been trampled by partygoers who'd spilled outside. When Thomas finally emerged around noon, hungover and irritable, I was cleaning up the mess myself, tears streaming down my face as I scrubbed John's table, trying to save it. "Why are you making such a big deal?" Thomas grumbled, pouring himself coffee without offering to help. "It's just stuff, Mom, and most of it is ancient anyway. Maybe this is a sign you should update the place." Something snapped inside me. "This is not just stuff, Thomas. This is my home, and that table was made by your father. How dare you dismiss it like that? And how dare you invite people here who have no respect for my property?" Thomas's face darkened. "My property too," he shot back. "I live here now, or have you forgotten, and I have a right to celebrate my birthday, how I want, where I want. If you're so worried about Dad's precious furniture, maybe you should put it in storage where it belongs, along with the rest of this museum to the past." The argument escalated from there with words exchanged that should never be said between mother and son. He called me controlling and stuck in the past. I called him entitled and ungrateful. By the end, we were both shouting, and Thomas stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the family photos on the wall. 3 of them fell, their frames cracking on impact with the floor, a fitting metaphor for what was happening to our relationship. That fight set a new tone for our interactions, a cold war punctuated by brief, tense exchanges about necessary household matters. I stopped cooking for him entirely. He stopped pretending to help with any maintenance. We existed in the same space, but rarely at the same time, like ghosts haunting different hours of the same house. Then, Thomas began dating Kimberly, a woman 10 years his junior who worked at his company. The first time he brought her home, I made an effort to be welcoming, preparing a nice dinner and opening a bottle of wine. Kimberly was beautiful with long blonde hair and a perfect smile, but something about the way she looked around the house made me uneasy. Her eyes seemed to be assessing everything, calculating value or finding fault. "What a quaint place," she said in a tone that made it clear quaint was not a compliment. Within weeks, Kimberly was staying over multiple nights a week, then most nights, then seemingly all the time. She used my bath products without asking, left her makeup strewn across the bathroom counter, and cranked the hot water heater to temperatures that scalded my skin when I showered. Like Thomas, she contributed nothing financially but complained constantly about the home's shortcomings. "The water pressure in this house is terrible," she'd announce at breakfast. Or, "Don't you think these kitchen cabinets are super outdated? My mom just got the cutest renovation done." They would stay up late watching television at volumes that made sleep impossible or worse, making noises in Thomas's bedroom that no mother should ever have to hear from her adult child. When I asked them to be more considerate of quiet hours, Kimberly rolled her eyes so dramatically I thought they might fall out of her head. "It's not like it's a nursing home, May," she said the first time she'd dropped the Mrs. Sullivan she'd used initially. The familiarity felt invasive rather than friendly. My health began to suffer under the constant stress. At my annual checkup, Dr. Patterson expressed concern about my blood pressure, which had always been perfect before. "Have there been any major changes or stresses in your life, May?" she asked, looking over her reading glasses at me. I broke down in her office, confessing the whole situation through tears I'd been holding back for months. Dr. Patterson listened attentively, then prescribed not just medication for my blood pressure, but a recommendation that made me flush with shame. "I think you might benefit from speaking with someone about this situation," she said gently, writing down the name of a therapist. "What you're describing sounds like a form of emotional abuse, even if it's not intentional on your son's part." The word abuse shocked me. Surely that was too strong a term for a mother-son living arrangement that had simply become strained, but when I described the situation to Laura over coffee the next day, her reaction was even more blunt. "May you need to kick that ungrateful brat out of your house," she said loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. "John would be rolling in his grave if he could see how Thomas is treating you and the home you built together." "I can't just throw him out," I protested weakly. "He's my son. Where would he go? He's 35 years old with a good job," Laura countered. "He should have been gone 2 years ago. He can rent an apartment like every other adult. The question is, where will you go if you let this continue? Because I'm watching my best friend disappear into a shell and I don't like it one bit." I promised Laura I would think about taking more definitive action, but in truth, I was afraid. Afraid of confrontation, afraid of being alone again, afraid of damaging our relationship beyond repair. So I continued to retreat further into my bedroom sanctuary, while the rest of the house became increasingly foreign territory. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in April. I had returned from my weekly dinner with Laura earlier than expected. The restaurant had been too crowded, the wait too long, so we'd cut our meal short. Thomas's car wasn't in the driveway, but lights were on inside the house. As I approached the front door, I could hear Kimberly's voice coming through the partially open living room window. "I just don't understand why she's still here," Kimberly was saying to someone on the phone. "This house is way too big for one old lady, and it's in a prime location. Thomas could sell it for a fortune." My hand froze on the doorknob. I knew I should announce my presence, but something kept me rooted to the spot. "I know, right?" Kimberly continued. "I told him he needs to have a serious talk with her. There are plenty of nice retirement communities where she could have friends her own age, and we could finally have this place to ourselves. The commute is killing me, and my lease is up next month." I felt sick, physically ill at the calculation in her voice. This wasn't just idle complaining. This was a plan they had clearly discussed before. My own son was plotting to push me out of my home. I quietly let myself in through the side door and went straight to my bedroom, avoiding the living room where Kimberly was still chatting away. I sat on my bed in the dark, John's picture clutched to my chest, trying to process what I'd overheard. Sleep was impossible that night. The next morning I was making coffee when Thomas came into the kitchen looking surprised to see me up so early. "Morning, Mom," he said, reaching around me for a mug. "You're up with the birds today." "I need to ask you something, Thomas," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I need an honest answer." He looked wary, but nodded. "Okay, shoot." "Are you and Kimberly planning to move in here permanently, and are you expecting me to move out to make that happen?" Thomas's face flushed, then paled. He set down his mug with a thud. "Did Kimberly say something to you?" "I overheard her on the phone last night, talking about retirement communities where I could go and how you could sell this house for a fortune." "Mom, you misunderstood," Thomas said quickly, but his eyes shifted away from mine. "Kimberly was probably just venting. You know how she gets sometimes." "So you haven't discussed me moving out?" I pressed. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of John that it made my heart ache. "Look, we might have talked about the future in general terms. This house is really big for just one person, and you're not getting any younger. Wouldn't it be easier for you to be somewhere with less maintenance, more support?" "This is my home, Thomas," I said quietly. "Your father and I bought it together. We raised you here. He died here. Every memory I have is in these walls." "But that's just it, Mom," Thomas said, his voice taking on the condescending tone I'd grown to hate. "You're living in the past. Dad's been gone for 10 years. Don't you think it's time to move on? Create a new chapter? By giving you my house." The bluntness of my question seemed to startle him. "Not giving exactly," he backpedaled. "Maybe we could work something out. You could use the money from the sale for a nice little condo or something. The house is paid for. I have no mortgage. Why would I sell it to buy something else and take on new expenses at my age?" Thomas's patience was visibly thinning. Because it's practical, Mom. Because that's what people do. They downsize when they get older. They don't cling to empty houses full of ghosts. The cruelty of that last statement took my breath away. John wasn't a ghost to be exorcised. He was the love of my life, the father of my son, the man who had built this home with me, board by board, memory by memory. I think you should leave, I said, surprising myself with the words. Thomas laughed a short, harsh sound. Leave, Mom. I live here now. I've been here 5 years. My mail comes here. My girlfriend is about to move in. If anyone should be thinking about other arrangements, it's you. What did you just say? I could hardly believe my ears. Thomas sighed dramatically as if explaining something to a child. Mom, it's time you moved out. There, I said it. Kimberly's lease is up next month, and we need more space. This arrangement was always temporary until I got back on my feet. Well, I'm back on my feet now, and I need my own place. Your own place, I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. This is not your place, Thomas. This is my house. Your father left it to me. My name is on the deed, not yours. Well, maybe it's time to change that, he shot back. I'm your son, your only child. This house will be mine eventually anyway. Why wait until you're dead? The word dead hit me like a physical blow. Is that what he was waiting for? My death? So he could inherit the house without the inconvenience of having to deal with me. Get out, I whispered, then louder. Get out. Mom, you're being hysterical, Thomas said, backing away with his hands up. Let's talk about this when you're calmer. There's nothing to talk about. You've made your position very clear. Now please leave. I need to be alone. Thomas shook his head, muttering something about menopause and irrational as he walked out of the kitchen. Moments later, I heard the front door slam and his car start up. I collapsed at the kitchen table, my whole body shaking with shock and betrayal. My own son had just told me to get out of my own home. The home John and I had built together, the home we had raised him in. How had we come to this? I spent that day moving between grief and anger, looking at old photo albums and running my hands over furniture John had crafted. In one album, I found pictures of Thomas as a toddler taking his first steps across the living room. In another, his high school graduation party in the backyard. Had he forgotten all of that? Or did none of it matter to him anymore? As evening approached, my sorrow began to crystallize into something harder and more resolute. John's voice seemed to echo in my head. This house is your security, May. Never let it go. He had worked so hard to ensure I would always have a home, would never be vulnerable or dependent in my later years. And here was our son trying to take that security away for his own convenience. That night, I slept surprisingly well, perhaps because for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I called Laura before Thomas was awake. I need your help with something, I said, and I need your absolute discretion. Laura, who had been a real estate agent for 20 years, listened without interruption as I explained what had happened and what I wanted to do. When I finished, there was a long silence. Are you absolutely sure about this, May? She finally asked. It's a drastic step. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. Can you help me? Of course I can, Laura said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. And between us, I think it's about damn time. That afternoon, while Thomas was at work, Laura came over with paperwork and a photographer. We moved quickly, taking pictures of the house for a listing that would go live the next day. Laura had already contacted a couple of her clients who she knew were looking for exactly this kind of property in this neighborhood. We'll price it aggressively, she said. Below market value, but not suspiciously so. Just enough to generate immediate interest and multiple offers. With the current market, I expect we'll have solid offers within days. I signed the listing agreement with a steady hand, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and empowerment. This was not how I had imagined leaving the home John and I had shared, but Thomas had forced my hand. If he wanted me out so badly, he would get his wish, but not in the way he expected. The next step was financial planning. I called my advisor Michael, who had been managing my modest portfolio since John died. I need to liquidate some investments, I told him, and I need advice on purchasing a new property quickly, possibly with cash, to make the offer more attractive. Michael, like Laura, seemed surprised by my sudden decision, but supportive once I explained the situation. Actually, this might work out well financially, he said. The current market is strong for sellers, and there are some excellent options for someone in your position looking to downsize but maintain quality of life. That evening, when Thomas returned from work, I was perfectly pleasant, giving no indication of my plans. He seemed relieved that I wasn't continuing our confrontation from the morning, probably assuming I had calmed down and accepted the inevitable. We ate dinner separately, as had become our custom, and retreated to our respective areas of the house. The listing went live the next morning, and by afternoon Laura had scheduled 5 showings for the following day, all while Thomas would be at work. She also had news that made my heart race with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The Johnsons saw the online listing and want to make an offer sight unseen, she said. They're relocating from California for work and need a place immediately. They're offering cash $10,000 over asking with a 7-day close. 7 days, I gasped. Is that even possible? It's aggressive but doable, Laura assured me. They're motivated buyers with cash in hand. No financing contingencies, no inspection contingencies. They're willing to take the house as is. I thought about it for all of 30 seconds before agreeing. Let's do it. The next several days passed in a blur of secret activity. While Thomas was at work, I met with Laura and the Johnsons, who loved the house exactly as much as I had when John and I first saw it. I signed acceptance papers and began the closing process. Meanwhile, Michael had found a perfect apartment in a newly built senior living community just 15 minutes away, close enough to maintain my existing friendships, but in an entirely different zip code from Thomas. The apartment was a 2-bedroom unit with a small patio garden, part of a community that offered independent living with optional services as needed. There was a clubhouse, a pool, organized activities, and best of all, no maintenance responsibilities. I put down a deposit and arranged to move in immediately after closing on the house. The hardest part was packing secretly. I started with items Thomas wouldn't notice: missing photo albums from the hall closet, winter clothes from the attic, books from my bedroom shelves. I sorted through decades of accumulated possessions, keeping only what truly mattered or served a practical purpose. John's handcrafted furniture would come with me, of course, along with family heirlooms and photos. The rest I donated or sold quickly through online marketplaces. A local moving company agreed to come on closing day to take my essential belongings to the new apartment. The timing would be tight, but with Laura's help coordinating it could work. Everything had to be removed while Thomas was at work before he returned to find the locks changed and new owners taking possession. Through it all, I maintained a facade of normalcy around Thomas. If he noticed boxes disappearing or items missing, he didn't mention it. He was too absorbed in his own life and Kimberly's impending move and plans they were making for their future in my home. The evening before closing day, I allowed myself one last walk through the house, touching walls that had sheltered me, looking out windows that had framed so many sunrises and sunsets. I whispered goodbye to John in our bedroom, promising him I would be okay, that I was doing what was necessary to protect myself and the security he had worked so hard to provide. "I think you'd be proud of me," I told his photograph. "It's not what either of us planned, but it's what needs to happen now." That night, I slept soundly, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Closing day dawned bright and clear, as if the universe approved of my decision. Thomas left for work at his usual time, completely unaware that by the time he returned, our lives would be irrevocably changed. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. Laura arrived at 8:30, bringing coffee and a reassuring hug. "Ready for this?" she asked, squeezing my shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. We drove together to the title company's office, where the Johnsons were waiting with their attorney. They were a lovely couple in their 40s with 2 teenage children, exactly the kind of family this house deserved. Mr. Johnson shook my hand warmly. "We promise to take good care of your beautiful home," he said, and I believed him. The closing process took less than an hour. I signed paper after paper, each signature releasing me from the past and propelling me toward a future I was only beginning to imagine. When the final document was signed, Mr. Johnson handed me a certified check for the sale amount minus Laura's commission. It was more money than I had ever seen at one time, and it represented freedom. "Congratulations," the closing agent said, smiling as she handed me a copy of the deed transfer. The property has officially changed hands. Back at the house, things were moving quickly. The movers had arrived during our absence and were efficiently loading my carefully labeled boxes and furniture. John's handcrafted pieces were wrapped in protective blankets treated with the reverence they deserved. My clothes, personal items, and keepsakes were being transferred to the truck that would take them to my new apartment. Meanwhile, a locksmith was changing all the exterior locks at the Johnsons' request. They would take possession immediately, though they wouldn't move in for another week. Their teenage son would be staying in the house tonight to secure their new property, while the rest of the family wrapped up loose ends at their hotel. By early afternoon, the house was empty of my belongings. I stood in the cleared space, feeling lighter than I had in years. The burden of maintaining this large home, of navigating the increasingly toxic relationship with Thomas, of trying to honor John's memory while still moving forward, all of it lifted from my shoulders. I was 61 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision solely for myself. Laura helped me do a final walkthrough, checking that nothing important had been left behind. In Thomas's room, I left an envelope containing a cashier's check for 1/3 of the sale proceeds after the purchase of my new apartment. It was more than generous, more than he deserved after these past years, but he was still my son. I wouldn't leave him with nothing, despite how he had treated me. "Are you sure about that?" Laura asked when I showed her the check. "After everything he's put you through?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "This isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming my life and my independence. Besides, a clean break is better for both of us." As the moving truck pulled away, I placed a small suitcase and a box of personal items in Laura's car. All that remained was to wait for Thomas and deliver the news in person. I wouldn't sneak away without facing him one last time. "You don't have to do this part," Laura said as we sat in her car parked across the street. "I can drop you at your new place now. Let him figure it out when he gets home." I shook my head. "No, I need to see this through. He's still my son, and I want him to hear this from me directly." At 4:30, Thomas's car turned onto the street. I watched his expression change from confusion to alarm as he noticed the "sold" sign in the front yard. He parked haphazardly in the driveway and ran to the front door, fumbling with his key that no longer worked. After several frustrated attempts, he began pounding on the door, then peering through windows. I took a deep breath and stepped out of Laura's car. "Stay here," I told her. "I'll be back in a few minutes." Thomas was on his phone, presumably calling me when he spotted me walking toward him. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. His face was a mask of disbelief and growing anger. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Why is there a sold sign, and why won't my key work?" I stopped a few feet away from him, maintaining a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional one I was establishing. "The house has been sold, Thomas. The new owners have taken possession as of today." "What? You can't be serious." His face flushed dark red. "This is some kind of sick joke, right? To scare me because of what I said." "No joke," I said calmly. "You made it very clear that you wanted me to move out, so I did. And since it's my house, I decided to sell it, rather than give it to you." "You can't do that," he shouted loud enough that a neighbor across the street looked up from watering her flowers. "This is my home too. I've been living here for 5 years. I have rights." "Actually, you don't," I corrected him. "Your name isn't on the deed or the mortgage. You've never paid rent, so you're not even technically a tenant. You're an adult son who was allowed to stay in his mother's home out of kindness, a kindness you took advantage of." Thomas's face contorted with rage. "Where am I supposed to go?" "What about my stuff?" "Your things are still inside. You'll need to contact the new owners about arranging to collect them." I reached into my purse and handed him a business card. "This is their attorney's contact information." "This is insane," Thomas sputtered. "You've lost your mind. What about Kimberly? She's moving in next week." "I suggest you call her right away and make other arrangements," I said, feeling a twinge of satisfaction I wasn't entirely proud of. "Perhaps you can rent an apartment together like normal adults in a relationship." "I can't believe you would do this to me," Thomas said, his voice cracking. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the hurt little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and bruised feelings looking for comfort. "Your own son." That glimpse nearly broke my resolve, but I remembered his cold voice saying, "It's time you moved out." I remembered Kimberly discussing retirement homes where they could ship me off. I remembered years of disrespect and entitlement in the home John and I had built with love. "I left something for you," I said, my voice softening slightly. "There's an envelope in your room with a check. Your share of the proceeds after I purchased my new place. It should be enough for a down payment on a house of your own if you manage it wisely." Thomas stared at me, comprehension slowly dawning in his eyes. "You planned this, all of it, behind my back." "Yes," I admitted, "just like you and Kimberly planned to push me out of my own home. The difference is I had the legal right to do what I did." A car door opened behind us, and Laura approached, standing supportively at my shoulder. "Everything okay here, May?" "Everything's fine," I assured her, though Thomas's glare suggested otherwise. "We're just finishing up." "Mom, please," Thomas said, his anger giving way to desperation. "We can figure something out. Maybe I was wrong about asking you to leave. We can look for a bigger place, something that works for all of us." I shook my head. "No, Thomas, this needed to happen, for both of us. You're 35 years old. It's time you truly stood on your own feet, not just financially, but emotionally, and it's time I started living for myself again." "Where will you go?" he asked, looking suddenly small and uncertain. "I've found a lovely apartment in a community for active seniors," I said. "It's perfect for me at this stage of my life, but I don't think we should have contact for a while. We both need time to process this change." Thomas's face hardened again. "Fine, if that's how you want it, but don't expect me to come running when you realize you've made a huge mistake." "I won't," I assured him, turning to walk away. "Goodbye, Thomas. I hope you use that check wisely. It's more than you deserve, but less than what you expected to get from me." As Laura and I walked back to her car, I heard Thomas kick the tire of his own vehicle and swear loudly. I didn't look back. My future was ahead of me now, not behind. "You okay?" Laura asked as we drove away, leaving Thomas standing on the sidewalk staring after us. I took a deep breath and felt a smile spread across my face, surprising both of us. "You know what I really am." The first night in my new apartment was surreal. After decades in the same house, the unfamiliar sounds and spaces felt almost like a hotel room. I had brought just enough furniture to make it comfortable, with John's handcrafted pieces adding warmth and familiarity to the modern space. My bedroom was arranged similarly to my old one, and I had placed John's photograph in its usual spot beside my bed. "Well, we're somewhere new now," I told the picture as I got ready for bed. "I think you would approve. It's a nice place, secure and well-maintained, just like you wanted for me." I slept fitfully that first night, waking several times, disoriented by the strange surroundings. But by morning, I felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from my life for too long. I made coffee in my new kitchen, sat on my small patio to watch the sunrise, and began to imagine the life I could build here. The senior community turned out to be more vibrant than I had expected. During my first week, 3 different neighbors brought welcome gifts: homemade banana bread, a potted plant, and a bottle of decent wine. The community manager gave me a tour of the facilities, including a well-equipped gym, a library, and a calendar of activities ranging from water aerobics to pottery classes. "We're not one of those sedated retirement homes," she assured me with a wink. "Most of our residents are as active and independent as you are. We just provide the infrastructure and community that makes this stage of life more enjoyable." I quickly settled into a routine that was entirely my own for the first time in years. Mornings began with coffee on the patio, followed by a walk around the community's landscaped grounds or a swim in the indoor pool. Afternoons might include a book club meeting, a cooking class, or simply reading in the comfortable silence of my own space. Evenings were for trying new recipes in my compact but efficient kitchen, watching whatever I wanted on television, or having dinner with new friends at the community dining room. The freedom was intoxicating. No one criticized my choices or made me feel I was taking up too much space. No one left messes for me to clean up or expected me to cater to their preferences. For the first time in decades, I was living solely according to my own rhythms and desires. But alongside the liberation came waves of guilt and doubt. Had I done the right thing? Had I been too harsh with Thomas? Should I have tried harder to make the living situation work? These questions would ambush me unexpectedly, especially at night when defenses were low. 2 weeks after the move, I decided to seek professional help processing what had happened. The community had a counseling service as part of its wellness program, and I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elena Patel, a family therapist with gray in her hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. "What you're feeling is entirely normal," she assured me, after I'd related the whole story. "You've experienced a form of parental abuse followed by a necessary but dramatic separation. Both those things require healing." "Abuse seems like such a strong word," I protested weakly. "It's the accurate word," Dr. Patel countered, gently. "Your son systematically disrespected your boundaries, took advantage of your generosity, and ultimately attempted to push you out of your own home for his benefit. If this had been a romantic partner rather than a son, would you hesitate to call it abusive?" Put that way, I couldn't argue with her assessment. We spent the next several sessions unpacking the dynamics that had developed between Thomas and me over those 5 years, and the patterns of enabling that I had fallen into out of maternal love and guilt. "You did the right thing," Laura reassured me when we met for lunch a month after the move. "I've never seen you looking this healthy and relaxed. The old May is coming back." She was right. My blood pressure had returned to normal levels. I was sleeping better than I had in years. I'd even lost a few pounds from regular swimming and walking. Most importantly, I felt a sense of agency and self-respect that had been eroding gradually during those years with Thomas. Support came from unexpected quarters, too. My sister Jennifer, who had initially been shocked by my drastic action, visited my new apartment and gave it her emphatic approval. "This place suits you," she declared, looking around the bright, uncluttered space. "And frankly, Thomas had this coming. I never said anything because I didn't want to come between you two, but that boy took shameful advantage of you after John died." Friends from my old neighborhood made the effort to stay in touch, driving over for coffee or meeting me halfway for lunch dates. Several expressed admiration for what they called my courage, though I didn't feel particularly courageous. I had simply reached a breaking point and acted to protect myself as any creature would when cornered. Thomas, meanwhile, remained silent. The check I had left him was cashed within days, but no acknowledgement or thanks came my way. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard he and Kimberly had rented an apartment in the city closer to their workplaces, but considerably smaller and more expensive than the house had been. I tried not to think about him too much, focusing instead on building my new life, but sometimes I would find myself wondering how he was doing, whether he understood why I had taken such a dramatic step. The first tentative contact came almost a month after the sale, a text message arriving late one evening. "I hope you're doing okay. T." I stared at those 7 words for a long time, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely to maintain the clean break I had established. Another part recognized it as a small olive branch, the first acknowledgement that I existed as a person with feelings worthy of consideration. After consulting with Dr. Patel, I decided to respond with equal brevity. "I am well. Thank you for asking." That brief exchange opened a narrow channel of communication. Every week or so, Thomas would send another short text, sometimes a question about a family recipe or where to find his birth certificate, sometimes just a comment about the weather or a game he knew I followed. I responded politely but briefly each time, maintaining the emotional distance I knew was necessary for my healing. 3 months after the sale, he asked if we could meet for coffee. Again, I consulted with Dr. Patel, who advised caution but supported the idea of a brief public meeting if I felt ready. We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between my new apartment and his place, neutral territory for both of us. Seeing Thomas in person again was harder than I had anticipated. He looked thinner, his face more lined, his eyes lacking the entitled confidence I had grown accustomed to seeing there. He stood awkwardly when I arrived, unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. We settled for a stiff nod before sitting across from each other. "You look good, Mom," he said after we had ordered. "Really good, actually." "Thank you," I replied. "The new place suits me well." Conversation was stilted at first, full of careful pleasantries and avoiding the elephant in the room. Finally, Thomas set down his coffee cup with a decisive click. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quiet but steady. A big one. I was awful to you, and I didn't even realize how awful until you were gone. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. When I moved back home, I was in such a bad place, he continued. The divorce, losing my job, feeling like a failure. You were so kind, so willing to help, and somewhere along the way I started taking that for granted. Then, taking advantage. Then, just taking. Yes, you did, I confirmed, seeing no reason to soften the truth. Kimberly and I broke up, he added after a pause. 2 weeks after we moved into the apartment. Turns out she was more interested in the house she thought I was going to get than in me. I wasn't entirely surprised, but I did feel a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry to hear that, Thomas shrugged. Don't be. It was a wake-up call I needed. Made me see how I'd been treating you through her treatment of me. The entitlement, the criticism, the lack of appreciation. I became everything I used to hate in other people. It was the most self-aware statement I'd heard from my son in years. I studied his face looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but found none. Just genuine remorse and perhaps a new humility. I used the money you left me wisely, he added. Put a down payment on a small townhouse. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. And I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand how I got so off track. I'm glad to hear that, I said, and meant it. I don't expect forgiveness, Thomas said, meeting my eyes directly. What I did, what I said to you, it's probably unforgivable, but I wanted you to know that I understand now and I'm trying to be better. I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once, Thomas. It's a process for both of us. I'm still working through my own feelings about what happened between us. That's fair, he nodded. More than fair, actually. But I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, I continued. Slowly, with boundaries as two independent adults who respect each other. If that's something you want too. The relief that flooded his face was answer enough. I'd like that very much, he said. We talked for another hour, more easily, now that the heaviest words had been spoken. We agreed to meet again in 2 weeks, and to maintain our text communications in the meantime. As we parted outside the cafe, Thomas hesitated, then asked, Would it be okay if I hugged you? I nodded, and his embrace was gentle, respectful of the new boundaries between us. As I drove back to my apartment, I felt a cautious optimism that perhaps in time we might forge a healthier relationship than the one we had lost. 6 months have passed since that first coffee meeting. Thomas and I now have dinner together every other Sunday, sometimes at a restaurant, sometimes at my apartment, occasionally at his new place. Our relationship is different now, more balanced, with mutual respect that had been missing for too long. He asks about my activities and genuinely listens to my responses. I inquire about his work and new friends without feeling the need to fix his problems or offer unsolicited advice. My life in the senior community continues to flourish. I've made true friends here. Women and men who understand what it means to reinvent yourself in your 60s. I've taken up watercolor painting, joined a book club, and even started dating again, much to my own surprise. Nothing serious yet, but enjoyable companionship with a widower named Robert who lives 3 buildings over and makes excellent martinis. Looking back at that dramatic day when I sold the house from under Thomas, I sometimes wonder if there might have been a less extreme solution. But then I remember where I was headed if I hadn't taken such decisive action, a future of increasing disrespect, dwindling self-worth, and eventually being pushed out of my own home with nothing but my dignity in tatters. Instead, I reclaimed my power and my peace. I honored John's wish that I be secure and independent. And paradoxically, by cutting the unhealthy ties with my son, I created space for a more authentic relationship to eventually grow. The greatest lesson I've learned through all of this is that love sometimes requires difficult actions. True maternal love isn't about endless sacrifice and martyrdom. It's about modeling self-respect and boundaries, showing by example that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, especially in their own home. As for that house on Maple Street, I drove by it last week, curious to see what changes the Johnsons might have made. The exterior was freshly painted and children's bicycles lay on the front lawn. A basketball hoop had been installed above the garage and flowers bloomed in the garden beds I had so carefully tended. The house was alive again, filled with a new family, creating their own memories within its walls. I smiled as I drove away, feeling no regret, only gratitude for both what was and what is. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go of what no longer serves us, even when holding on seems easier. Sometimes we need to be pushed to our limits before we find the courage to stand firm. And sometimes when someone tells you to move out of your own house, the best response is to pack your bags, sell the place while they're at work, and leave them standing on the sidewalk, forced to face the consequences of their own actions. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have taken such a dramatic step or tried to find another solution? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more tales of reclaiming power in difficult family situations. Share this with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to set boundaries and stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most peaceful outcomes.